time Mara and I signed the lease on our second apartment together, I thought we had crossed out of the fragile part of love, not the dramatic part, the administrative part. The part where you stop asking whether this person is really in your life and start arguing about lampshades, grocery brands, and whether either of you will ever finally throw away the tangled drawer of old chargers. We had a Tuesday night pasta routine, a shared note on our phones for household supplies, a running joke about how she always bought beautiful fruit she forgot to eat, and I always bought practical cereal that tasted like apology. None of that sounds romantic, which is probably why it felt safe. People talk a lot about the thrill of being chosen, not enough about the relief of no longer feeling provisional. That was the part one loved most. Not flowers, not anniversaries, just the sense that I had stopped auditioning. Mara was good at creating that feeling. She moved through rooms like she had already decided where everything belonged. Even when she was unsure, she sounded certain. She could make buying dish soap feel like evidence of a future. We were not engaged, but we had begun using the kind of language people use right before they are. Next year, when we finally get a bigger place, when we go in on something real, when we stop borrowing our life from temporary furniture. That was the atmosphere when the email arrived. I did not snoop. It came to the tablet we used for recipes, streaming, and the occasional attempt at being adults who compare couch dimensions before buying one. She was in the shower. I was looking up measurements for a narrow bookcase when a notification slid across the screen. Subject line, "Still yours if you want it." I would have ignored it. Except the preview line underneath said, "The cabin is already paid for, and it would be stupid to let it go to waste." There are sentences that sound harmless until your body hears them before your mind does. That was one of them. The email was from Julian. I knew who Julian was, not intimately, but enough. He was the man she had nearly married before me, the one whose name only surfaced in fragments, usually when someone from her college years told an old story in a way that made the room briefly reorganize itself. I had trained myself not to react to that name. Adults have histories. Mature people do not flinch every time the past leaves fingerprints. So I told myself this was probably boring. A tax form. A misplaced subscription. Some lingering practical thread from a life that no longer mattered. Then she came out of the bathroom, wet hair twisted in a towel, and took one look at my face. "What?" she asked. I turned the tablet toward her. "Oh," she said, not shocked, not guilty, just annoyed in the way people get when an inconvenience arrives before coffee. I asked, "What is this?" She pulled out a chair, sat down, and said, "It's nothing dramatic." Nobody says that unless they already know the thing can be heard another way. She explained that months before we started dating, she and Julian had booked a long weekend at a restored lakeside cabin outside Asheville. Apparently it was tied to one of those architecture and design retreat weekends she used to love, where people spent the day touring homes and the night pretending conversation around expensive wood tables counted as community. They had broken up before going. The reservation kept getting moved, then forgotten, then revived. Now the property had given one final date to use it before it expired. Julian had a work conflict, could not make it, and had emailed to say she should take it rather than waste something already paid for. I waited for the part where she said, "Obviously I'm not going." Instead, she shrugged and said, "It's basically a free weekend." That was the first moment something inside me went still. Not because it was proof of anything ugly, because she had answered a deeper question before I had asked it. I said, "You would go?" She leaned back like I had made the conversation more emotional than necessary. "It's a cabin," she said, "not a honeymoon." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was cruel, but because it was prepared. Like she had already arranged the situation into categories where my discomfort would look childish. I asked whether Julian would be there. She said probably not. Then, a second later, Tool said maybe he would drive up for one of the tours if his meeting cleared, but that was not the point. People reveal the point by telling you what is not the point. I asked why she had not mentioned any of this before. She said because it was old, unimportant, and frankly, too boring to bring up. Then she smiled that weary smile people use when they want credit for being the calm one and added, "I assumed you'd trust me." Trust is such a useful word when someone wants to move past respect. I told her this was not about surveillance or panic. It was about being asked to approve something that would feel humiliating even if nothing happened. A private getaway, booked in another life, still holding shape in this one. And now I was supposed to be the enlightened man who understood efficiency. She shook her head. "You're making it sound weird because of who paid for it." I said who paid for it is exactly why it's weird. Then came the line I still hear with perfect clarity. Not because she shouted it, because she said it so casually. "That plan existed before you mattered this much." The room did not explode. No glass broke. No one stood up. But I have never felt a sentence rearrange a relationship faster. Before you mattered this much. As if love were something measured in phases. As if seriousness could be adjusted retroactively. As if there was a tier of plans made in an older, more legitimate era, and I was asking to be ranked above them too soon. I think she realized immediately that it landed badly, because she tried to correct it. She said she meant before we were this established. Before we had combined routines, before life got complicated, before everything had to become symbolic. But that was the problem. It was already symbolic. Not because I wanted drama. Because human beings cannot ask each other to ignore hierarchy once they have named it. I asked her very quietly, "If this were my ex, and a cabin I once booked with someone I almost married, would you hear this as practical?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then said, "That's not fair." It was the closest thing to an honest answer I got all night. We kept circling the same terrain. She said it was wasteful not to use it. I said some things are supposed to be wasted. She said I was turning a scheduling issue into a loyalty test. I said maybe the problem was that loyalty should not have to be tested in the first place. At one point she laughed. Not mockingly, but defensively, and said, "You really think a cabin weekend means I don't care about us?" And I remember thinking, "Number. I think the way you are able to discuss it means something about us that I can't unlearn." That night, she texted 2 friends. By the next day, I could feel the story leaving our apartment and coming back flatter. One of them told me through the careful diplomacy of a speakerphone conversation I was not meant to be fully part of. That insecurity can make normal things look loaded. Another said, "If there's trust, a free weekend is just a free weekend." That was when I understood why the comments in stories like this get so intense. People are not reacting to the trip. They are reacting to being told the obvious wound is imaginary, because it can be described with calm vocabulary. I stopped arguing after that, not out of surrender, out of clarity. There is a point in some relationships where one person keeps making a case and the other person realizes the case itself is the answer. If someone can watch you absorb humiliation, then hand you cleaner words for it. They are not confused. They are invested in your cooperation. 2 days later, I came home early from work. Mara was on the bedroom floor with an open duffel bag, folding sweaters in the careful way people do when they still hope routine can soften meaning. She looked up and said, "I haven't decided." I believed that, which almost made it sadder. She still thought the decision lived in the trip. I had already realized it lived in the explanation. I went to the hall closet, pulled down one of the storage boxes we had never unpacked, and started filling it with the things that were unmistakably mine. Books with my notes in the margins, the ugly mug from my sister, the spare key bowl one had brought from the first apartment I rented alone. She stood in the doorway and said, "What are you doing?" I told her the truth. "I'm trying not to still be here when you get back and ask why everything feels different." She stared at me, more startled by the decisiveness than the pain. That was its own answer, too. I did not leave that night. Real life is less cinematic than people want. There were deposits, logistics, shared bills, a couch we still had not bought, and 3 basil plants on the windowsill neither of us could keep alive alone. But something finished there. Not because of Julian. Not because of a cabin. Not because I believed one weekend would erase an entire relationship. It finished because I finally understood the job I had been offered. I was supposed to be the reasonable present, the understanding man, the one mature enough to stand politely beside unfinished business from someone else's past and call it practicality. I used to think the danger in love was being replaced dramatically. Now I think a quieter danger is being kept provisionally, then praised for how gracefully you accept it. In the end, I never found out whether she took the trip. By the time the reservation date came, I was sleeping on my friend David's pull-out sofa, learning how strange it feels to miss someone and still know you were right to leave. What I remember most is not anger. It is the email preview on the tablet. Still yours if you want it. For days, I thought that sentence belonged to the cabin. Then I realized it belonged to the life she had not fully let expire. And once I understood that, staying would have required something more expensive than any reservation. It would have required me to keep pretending I was not temporary.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.